So the year is 2019. The world hasn't completely fallen on its face yet, and 7 Remake is about a year from release. I've flown halfway around the world, and now I'm sat here in the pitch black with 2 shamans singing their Icaros, a strange but oddly mesmerising sound as they call to the spirits of the plants for their wisdom and guidance, particularly the one residing in Ayahuasca. Now, even though I've been preparing for this moment for almost 3 months with rigorous fasting, training, eating all things nasty, green and bland, your world changes pretty quickly when your butt hits your particular mattress in the ceremony hall. You're isolated with various tissues and buckets for puke scattered around, and it suddenly dawns on you. This is actually happening. I'm waiting for the plant medicine to kick in, and somewhere out there in the dark I know there are 15 strangers and the 4 companions I had travelled with also waiting. I went with a friend, my twin, Tash, and El frickin' Ginge. Yeah. Now, why had we all come to Peru to drink this insanely potent drink? I guess like most, it was to know myself better, to explore my mind, challenge my beliefs, confront all the shadows I must have buried in my personality somewhere. After all, they must be there, right? Some messed up, detrimental moment from my forgotten childhood that either skewed or screwed me up. I mean, it was a pretty traumatic upbringing, and while most of it is a horrid blur, maybe it's a blur in my mind for a reason. I was ready to find out. And barely 20 minutes into taking the drink, as expected, I could feel the effects. I've always been super sensitive to psychedelics, and to describe just how this medicine feels, I mean, it's hard and almost impossible, but for me, it began like a deep surge of heavy, raw power, sort of building out from the middle of my stomach. And as it grew, my vision was slowly tuning into this very translucent blue web of light. It was like some sort of energy matrix that doesn't entirely unresemble the VR environment in 7. 1 hour later into the ceremony, any lingering semblance of atheism in me is being thoroughly freaked out because I can viscerally sense and at times even detect what can only be described as significant otherly presences in the room. You know, there are people in the room and it's still pitch black so my normal eyes can't see, but it's as if Ayahuasca was giving me this second sense or second sight. Maybe kind of like the Persona 5 shadow sight, except plot ghosts are on the other end. Like these swirling, shifting masses of things around the room. And as the medicine intensifies, these shapes start taking form. Eyes, clear as day, start flashing into my view. Faces, sometimes teeth and fangs. Sometimes they'd be a single pair of eyes just staring back at me through the darkness. Sometimes it would be entire columns of eyes, and I feel like I'm being closely analysed. And this may sound utterly terrifying to some, and at times, honestly, it was. It's not an easy ride, but then hour 2 came along, and from this whirlwind of personas steps a woman. I've never seen anyone like this person before. Fierce, piercing eyes and like this really elaborate headdress made out of vines and nature and flowers and leaves. Really quite something to behold, so foreign, and yet it feels like I know her. A feeling of familiarity so strong, and as I go to speak to her, opening my mouth, she simply shakes her head at me. The kind that Aerith gives Cloud, like, at the end of the highway. It was similar, and I instantly got the understanding from that this wasn't how we were going to communicate, that it's not via words, but through intuitive understanding. And really, that's exactly how the rest of the ceremonies after that all played out. And this is a super personal story, and you may wonder why I'm telling it or what it has to do with FF7, but don't worry, it relates. Because this personal, like, female figure, the shamans, they call her mother Ayahuasca. Sometimes Gaia. To other cultures, it might be Durga or Kali, or in Norse, I expect Freya. Frigg. In most every culture you point to, there is this mother archetype that we as humans carry within the elaborate frameworks of our ancestral mind. I'm not saying this woman was either real or not real. an actual spirit or just the contents of my mind. But to me, regardless of the answer, it makes it no less incredible and fascinating and illuminating to the depths that we as human beings have within the formation of our subconscious and unconscious minds. So maybe my mind is really forming this lady, but considering one of the most common reports for ayahuasca from people who have taken it is that you get this otherly presence with you. It feels like you've got a therapist in your head, and in one night you get 10 years of therapy. You receive a kind of healing in a way that makes no logical sense, and is why I've never spoken about it. But for me to come face to face with this entity, and for it to come up, and the first thing was to simply embrace me with pure love, not a single shred of judgment, condemnation, expectation. It was perhaps the first time I got a true sense of what a mother's unconditional love must be, and that elicited from me my child self. All of a sudden I was back there, and I was cascading through memories of moments where I got neglected, beaten, or left without food, and even just some silly ones came up. I didn't realize I was still carrying, but she was bringing them up. For example, I used to be terrified of the dark, so much I would hide under blankets, and I never would want to peek into the dark corners of the room. It was such a fear for me. So in this trip, when the sensation of, I don't even know how to describe it, but I could say a hand, a force, a breeze, like sort of lifted my chin, and it guided me to stare straight into the darkness in my mind. I'm being informed and comforted that, yeah, you have to do this. You have to take this step. And I stare into the dark, and as I do, just like all of this other very precise and targeted series of journeys that this medicine takes you on, for each one I go through, I can feel myself getting noticeably lighter, a sensation of strength and like power, courage, calm. It just keeps building and building until eventually one of the most incredible states of peace and euphoria I've ever felt just takes over. To say this experience made me relate to Cloud and Tifa's memory dive sequence is an understatement, and so many of the other themes in FF7, because it was as if I had traversed through all the pivotal and crisis point moments in early life, and that by revisiting them, moved on from them, healed, kind of got empowered, and there were certainly visions, imagery and encounters that I could identify as like being from my own memory. But then there were these other things that were so uncommon to my brain. Images of snakes and vines, spiders, octopus legs, mud, decay, roots, wild feral animals. Exactly the kind of imagery the shaman said gets seen repeatedly. Stuff that's so primal, so primitive that it was utterly foreign to my domesticated brain. So why, when I'm experiencing seeing these things, did I have such a strong sense of remembrance for it? That was overwhelming feeling the entire time, like waking up from a sleep and remembering something so obvious to you. It is as if I had tapped into memories that weren't just my own, but they felt like they belonged on a broader level to something out there. It's either nature or the human condition. After all, it was Carl Jung who said that the collective unconscious are just that, archetypes, primordial images that reflect basic patterns that are common to us all and which have existed universally since the dawn of time. Now, I don't pretend to fully comprehend the things I experienced or have experienced on the 5 or so times I've done Aya, but those are the main pillars of the experience: absurdly primal imagery, the peering of a distinctly mother figure, and the strong sensation of remembering things that are simultaneously new to my mind. It's trippy, and I tell this story because I not only think it's a concept active in Final Fantasy VII and the remake, but it's also potentially the entire answer to what will now be our option 3 of where Cloud gets his strength. So what's good, my fellow peasants? How you all doing? And yes, goddamn, I know he gets it from galactic steroids, okay? We will cover that. It's definitely a big aspect, but as I feel I made a strong case in part 1, there are also a ton of other potential factors at play. So be sure to check out this first vid, as it's going to be a real jumping off point to this one. It'll make a lot more sense, because we already covered 2 ways that Cloud gets his strength. Berserker adrenaline, which, just to expand out, I love your comments, I love them. Someone pointed out that in Punisher mode, of course, Cloud's more aggressive attack stance in 7 Remake, you can't defend with it, and if you go wailing in with the attacks, Cloud gets the Berserk status effect. Yeah, Berserk Adrenaline is definitely one. And the second one was the Runic Legacy, that Cloud, through the Buster Sword, he carries the legacy of previous heroes like Zack and Angeal, and I'd like to support this idea with this little line from Genesis.
You have succeeded Angeal's spirit, and carry a part of Sephiroth within you. Thus the 3 friends are reunited once again.
They were reunited again. Genesis could see Angeal and Sephiroth in Zack. So the idea that we discussed in the last vid, that a living legacy can be a real tangible power source in FF7, doesn't seem so unlikely. And in fact, I love the idea that someone suggested that it could, in part, be the strength that Sephiroth asks Cloud to give him in the remake. Strength Seth so badly needs, because Seth lost honor through his non-acceptance of death. He is cut off from having any kind of legacy. Or at least the one he does have has been corrupted by Jenova. So maybe Cloud is the only way Sephiroth can gain access to a legacy. Ooh, like some of the access points of the Sephiroths. Or another way to put this would be the golden chain of teachers, which many spiritual traditions see as a way to access the energy, wisdom, and protection of those who came before. In fact, that's what shamans also believe with these plant medicines. You access an ancestral lineage of teachers, and 'tis just a theory, but remember, Seth neither knows of his lineage, his origins, his mother, and he also doesn't have his memory. He loses them after the first time he gets thrown in the Mako pit. And this is why I'm proposing that the third way Cloud gets his strength is memory shamanism. So I want to propose something to your brain noodle. What if in FF7 the power level of a person is dictated by the number and quality of memories they have? Oh, that would be pretty weird, right? A weird but saucy concept. Well, I do think it's the case. See, we've discussed things like chi and limit break powers activating from heightened emotions and spiritual resonance. All these different modalities of power are present in this game's universe, but what is even more fundamental than these? It always is memory. See, spirit energy in FF7, the live stream, all of it is fundamentally just memory, a pool of memory. You know, we know that upon a peaceful death, the individualization of a person diffuses, and all that remains of them is their memory. Now, yes, of course, we have exceptions to this rule. Zack, Aerith stay individualized, Sephiroth manages to do it, and those are whole different stories, but they're the extreme exception to the rule. Most people have to accept this concept that it is both beautiful to some and terrifying to others, that one day you have to let go of all you consider to be you. Everything about your individual self that you've come to cherish, that you have to accept it becoming memory. And that's big, man. It is certainly something that Sephiroth cannot and will not accept. I'll never be just a memory, being the very last words we heard from him before his return in the remake. This is key. Aerith, on the other hand, she sees it completely different. She sees why it's important, why memory is sacred, why she calls him out at the end of the bridge that he has defiled. The sanctity of memory, like rain rolling off his back. It's why she tells Cloud that living every moment, making beautiful memories is key. You could say that's fundamentally the purpose of living itself, and it's why I believe FF7's core theme revolves entirely around corrupted versus pure memory. Jenova, and by extension Sephiroth, they are the corruptors. They're the ones who use memory to empower themselves, and that's why Seth spends all of OG trying to confuse Cloud, manipulate his identity, calling him a puppet, laughing when he cries, like, "Why are you crying, puppet? Don't pretend you have a heart." He pushes it so far, it gets to the point Cloud begins to doubt whether he was even a human child. And he tries to figure out if he had a human childhood, and it's a confusion that even Tifa gets pulled into. And it's why there is so much dedicated to the framing of memory throughout the game, why our pivotal moments of Cloud's character development arc all centered around memory. Tifa in this, she talks about how there are different kinds of memories. The ones that you can consciously recall, but those are often unreliable and prone to error. versus the kind locked deep within your heart. Those are the kind, I would say, Aerith is trying to encourage Cloud to uncover his true self. The Cloud she said she wanted to finally meet during the Gold Saucer Date. The Cloud, she tells in her final words, to really care about gaining clarity and to leave Sephiroth to her. After my Ayahuasca experience, I can't help but see scenes like the bottom of the pit after the temple shrieks as so scarily mimicking the experience I had. The scene of Cloud in adult form being pulled, being tempted to go to Sephiroth and hand him off the black materia, Sephiroth kind of representing the demons, the falsehood, the illusion of Cloud's ego, or certainly the force that perpetuates it, versus Aerith on the other side. And in between you have child Cloud, his child self drawn out, and there's even big old wah, like crying. Cloud is reduced to his child self. He's completely stripped back, and on one side we have Aerith, the teacher, trying to guide him back to his child self, and Sephiroth away. That's why, and especially after my Norse video where I was comparing Aerith to Freya from Norse mythology, Freya being Odin's wife, another name was Frigg. There's some discussion about whether Frigg and Freya were separate or the same. Funnily enough, one of them was way more flirtatious, bold and daring, traits that we definitely see within Aerith. The other one was far more like mystical, shamanic. In fact, both ladies had the power called Cedar. Cedar being a form of pre-Christian Norse magic and shamanism that involved the discerning of the course of fate within its structure to bring about change, often by symbolically weaving new events into existence. Just like Aerith is doing throughout the remake. So could Aerith be playing this archetypal mother role that has been accessed and has been through many? It's not just ayahuasca, you can do it through wachuma, San Pedro, sapo, cambo, mushrooms. This idea that there are these sacred plants housing these wise entities within them that are here trying to teach us. It's existed for thousands of years and across so many cultures, and it's really what the shamans I met stressed to us, that the plants contain secrets and that all we have to do is open our minds, open your hearts, have the courage to work with them to garner these understandings. I mean, these shamans take it even further, that they say that it's the plants who are telling them that they must make it accessible to everyone in the world because we are now one big joint family, and that these shamans were very reserved about giving it to Westerners until ayahuasca told them supposedly that the planet is now at a dangerous turning point where humanity has to awaken, and it has to be done as one big collective effort. Now, does this sound anything similar to anything you've heard in the remake?
It won't be much longer now. The flowers, they have something important to tell us. Something they need to share with us. At least, that's the feeling I get. But before they can, there's a final step that has to be taken. Otherwise, we won't hear them.
Aerith is a shaman. I mean, the symbolism of the flower and her being the flower girl runs so deep in FF7, especially for the purity and corruption, considering, we have the purple flowers associated with Sephiroth's colour and the yellow for hers, and that you follow the yellow flowers, which is a really cryptic line. I think it could be a symbol of following a path of truth and authenticity, of like the pure and uncorrupted memory, which it makes sense considering that the ghosts which are swirling around her, they are tormented souls stuck in the curse of individualization. They are essentially corrupted memory, and that's why their interference and the planet's desperate attempt to manipulate the events of the remake so that they conform to the planet's memory of OG FF7, and indeed us, the fans, and our memory of OG. A memory that, of course, some are so desperate to cling to and hate any thought of these characters evolving out in different ways, which Square have made so much commentary on that they kind of view it as stagnation. Something that wouldn't just limit themselves as directors and a dev team, but would limit the characters in terms of their growth, their journeys. And that's why I see the Whispers as being a pretty good representation of what is both a smart meta commentary about the nature of change, as well as tying really well with the existing concept of corrupted memory and expanding that out. And it's in part why I believe Aerith feels, when she comes in contact with these ghosts, that she is losing herself, because really our identities, our dreams, are all constructed by memory. And it's not just messing with Aerith, but I also think that's why the flower of truth, let's call it, dissolves. I think that's what the symbolism of it falling apart could have meant. But even the trained graveyard, they beefed that area out so much, and I think it was to show us this, because just like Marlene said, the children get carried off by the black wind, or who get carried by the black wind, have to live in the train graveyard forever. In other words, children who have been corrupted with dark, sorrowful emotion that causes their memory to stagnate. We actually see the baggy, ghosty, sad children whose memory have lingered because they were abandoned, and that abandonment energy, or the lingering memory of it, is one that Aerith has a similar resonance with. And I think it's why it causes even her to have, again, similar to an eye trip, this moment of reliving past childhood trauma. And I also think it's where I feel Square were telling us that Tifa and Marlene are also bound together by, yep, you guessed it, memories. Because memories aren't something individual to us, they're something we share, create, and what bind us to others. I think we've seen that with Tifa and Marlene. It's not just a Cloud to Sephiroth notion, it's a high fantasy aspect that applies to the entirety of FF7. And this idea of binding, quick side note, I kind of like that as the other reason for follow them the yellow flowers. The idea that Aerith wasn't saying that to the group. I mean, she was kind of tranced out and glazed over, typically the look she has when she's doing planet speaking, or I think the game calls it planet reading. So I like the idea that this was a hidden communication, either that she's telling the planet or being told to her, and that she's basically marking characters who are going to be the allies of the planet with the yellow flowers, the significant players who have a hand in its salvation. So of course Cloud gets his, Marlene interacts with it in the bar when she gets the little whisper ting. Again, the idea that memory equals strength, but it certainly gave Marlene the strength to do a sudden massive emotional 180. And yeah, Square have been very careful keeping that yellow flower Marlene association throughout the game. And yeah, even when Aerith is grilling Cloud on who he gave the flower to, could of course just be light-hearted teasing, but just with the intense she pressed that point, maybe they were teasing to us the hint of some cryptic dialogue happening between Aerith and the planet, and you know how much we love that cryptic stuff.
Spouting that cryptic stuff, which could all be bullshit.
So curing this corruption is of course Aerith's primary goal, and it's why she volunteers to break destiny, which in the context of FF7 is one of the planet's defense systems from having to face this new dark fate. Aerith is forcing the planet to let go of a particular narrative, which, we covered that in the Therapist Aerith video. Level 11 theory. You will need therapy, but this is again something Ayahuasca does as a psychedelic drink. It breaks down those defense mechanisms, and it's what makes it arguably so effective. Narrative rewrite, gaining the ability to move forward rather than be trapped by the past. And frequently, the trained graveyard kind of vibes why it's even important to have a shaman, and a trained shaman at that, with you during these ceremonies, and why these individuals take their job so seriously. It's not a job, it's a life. They spent years in huts, literally in isolation. Apparently all they eat is plantains, rice, trip mad balls on eye every day, so that they can perfect the art of communicating with spirits, of which they believe there is a whole range from terrible and demonic and here to sabotage, to allies of the planet and mankind who are actively taking a hand in trying to aid humanity in not completely bumblefucking the planet. And yeah, for a shaman that often comes in the form of breaking down childhood things for the practitioners who come to drink it, things rooted in childhood like Aerith, but we've got the good spirits like in OG. Aerith meets that Cetra spirit that's still lingering around. I think the game called it the spirit bodies, kind of like guardians who are staying around, trying to aid the right course, the right direction of the events of things, the planets. And Aerith is really humbled and kind of inspired, I think, when she meets that Cetra. And it's why she would so hate the polar opposite, which in this case is the Elegor in this scenario. The Elegor is a literal manifestation of that. It's the manifestation of the memories and sorrows that linger in the train graveyard. An actual manifestation that feeds from the dark memory of it, and a powerful one at that. So what more proof do we need that memory can equal power in this game? I think it does. The other ghost boss we fought was literally sad kid memories coalesced into some big nightmarish arsehole. And we don't like nightmarish arseholes, but I definitely met some in Aya, and this was what the shaman said their role is, that they actually form in their time training in isolation for years, is they make individual contracts with some of these spirits. They even say that's why their Icaros are so unique between shamans. None of their songs are the same, or even sometimes the style of singing. And I had a father and son as our shaman, and it was completely different because apparently they learn the song from the allies that they connect with, and part of the spirit is to ward off just that, the kind of spirits that will try to worm their way into the environment and maliciously hijack the ceremony. On my second trip in Sweden, only a few months ago now, I met a female shaman, and I kid you not, she told me that this thing had been sabotaging the ceremony and actually getting the two shamans to argue and snap at each other. We're going deep out into esoteric land now. She supposedly asked it what it wanted, and it just simply said her. It wanted her, and her response to that was to say, it's not me that you want, it's the love inside of me that you're craving. Apparently when she said that, she demonstrated or tried to exhibit or feel feelings of a love towards this thing, I guess, and apparently that is what made it dissolve in the end. A little bit different to Elagor, just needed a teeth or ass kicking, but if we now consider that Aerith is playing the same role as Ayahuasca, as this mother archetype, a shaman who nurtures alliances with spirits, can transmute dark and fallen ones with love, and by forcing up to the surface all these corrupting narratives, essentially purifies them. The kind of purification we see Aerith do throughout the game. Corridor of Darkness Seth opened at Destiny's Crossroad, purifying all the clarity that she gives to Red to abate his fear and aggression. Again, breaking the cycle of the Whispers and the planet, sort of purifying that process. And just the process she guides Cloud through the entire game. It's coming into the clarity of his memories. And no, it's even why the cure for geostigma in Advent Children, again, corrupted memory, is cured by the livestream waters found beneath Aerith's flower garden. She is the archetypical shamanistic mother goddess figure, and that's the reason why they repeatedly had Aerith called Mother throughout Advent Children. And I'd say it fits perfectly because what made my Ayahuasca experience so profound was, again, how unconditional that feeling of love was. It felt like none of the bad or shameful stuff I had done mattered. There was definitely a lot of worthiness issue. I didn't even feel like I deserved to be feeling the way I was feeling, and yet through her, through this Aya experience or spirit or my own mind, I felt like I was able to forgive myself for those things because of that pure unconditional love. And I think that's why Aerith is replacing Minerva as the new will and representation of the live stream, like the new goddess, because she can show, unlike Minerva, that unconditional love. Because like in this scene, Cloud had just handed over the black materia to Sephiroth, an absolute derpy McDerping, world-ending, apocalyptic mistake, and notice how Aerith completely holds composure. She comforts him and assures him it wasn't his fault. Even when he attacks her, the very, very next scene later, Aerith is unchanged. She's showing the same compassion, and arguably it's why in Maiden Who Travels Through the Planet, loads of souls in that actually unite their essence with hers. Essentially, they give up individualization, diffuse into memory that allies and merges with hers because of her skill of non-judgment. I mean, even freaking Dean, a grizzled, crazed murderer, finds peace because Aerith again shows him love. It's a universal quality we're all searching for, right? It's perhaps the most honest and foundational thing that we're all searching for, and FF7 brings this theme to its forefront because at the end of the day, isn't that really what Sephiroth is after? Like, just the love of a mother? He was brought up in a lab, he never met Lucretia, Professor Gast was the only one, Sephiroth says in the library, to show him any sort of care, and then he just disappears from Seph's life. Abandonment issues are huge for this villain, and it's what Jenova essentially uses to deceive and manipulate him. His want for the love of a mother. Jenova convinces him she's his mother, and it's even what Genesis was seeking in Minerva, but she also condemns him. And then there's Aerith, the real deal, the person who actually can show that kind of love, and at the end of OG was potentially by Katasa, own belief, the face who welcomes every soul of humanity into the live stream. Even in OG, Sid Highwind has this like really deep line where he says that he could imagine that the planet is like a little child, a scared little child that's lost in space on its own, essentially trying to find its way. What if the planet nominates Aerith as a live stream goddess in its own search for a mother figure? Pretty nuts. I'm essentially suggesting Aerith is cosmos scale waifu material. Not to mention, of course, Cloud freaking Strife's journey really gets started by the death of his mother, but I think we have no better example of Aerith demonstrating this quality than when she even welcomes Kadaj, a remnant who is a literal extraction of Sephiroth, again dominated by that desire to look for a mother, and even in the face of all the terrible deeds Kadaj had done, Aerith frickin' accepts him, and Kadaj finally finds what he was seeking.
You don't have to hang on any longer.
Mother, is that?
Everyone's waiting, if you're ready.
I know so many people don't like Kadaj, but wow, that is such a beautiful scene, and really why to me Aerith conceptually represents something so powerful, especially in an age where really most of us are really just that, broken children trapped in aging bodies. It's why I love Persona 5 and particularly Strikers, where a big part of what's going on with the antagonists and how we get through their jail is by visiting their childhood trauma rooms. Yeah, they're like a recreation of the place where something bad happened in their childhood. And this is a regular part of Carl Jung's thinking, that the shadow self is a coping mechanism constructed at a time of naivety and not knowing better when handling difficult, never experienced before situations. You had to come up with a response on the spot, and this is what the shadow self, that the ego was constructed around, and that by shining a light on it, by bearing witness to what has made up this structure, similar to my ayahuasca trip or Cloud's memory dive, that by doing that's how you unlock the power that lies hidden at the center of the shadow self. There's a gift waiting there, and that gift ultimately resembles a freedom that is akin to your childhood. Because Carl Jung said in every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child. Something that is always becoming, is never completed, and calls for unceasing care, attention, and education. That is the part of the personality which wants to develop and become whole. Even my main boy Lao Tzu, the enlightened master of Taoism, he describes himself as an idiot with a brain like a child, and states, "Wise men hear and see as little children do." I particularly like his description of what it means to be a master, or to master one's own self, because it could be seen as a pretty fitting description for Aerith. The master has no mind of her own. She works with the mind of the people. She is good to people who are good. She is also good to people who aren't good. This is true goodness. She trusts people who are trustworthy. She also trusts people who aren't trustworthy. This is true trust. The master's mind is like space. People don't understand her. They look to her and wait. She treats them like her own children. In another verse, he says that the sage lives in harmony with all below heaven. He sees everything as his own self. He loves everyone as his own child. All people are drawn to him because he behaves like a little child. And it doesn't need to be said, Aerith's connection with children all throughout the series, how they are drawn. I mean, the remake was huge. She had like a mob of kids swarming around her, and not even the kids, that the rest of the townsfolk would call her Aerith, and they would act playful and light-hearted, which is why Aerith stands out so much in FF7, because in these horrible, poverty-ridden slum conditions, Aerith is this breath of fresh air who brings out this aspect in people. It's beautiful. So that's a huge thing. Reconciling your child self with all that you have become now as an adult, that being a path to mastery, to power. And while doing plant psychedelics, ayahuasca, or going the shamanism route is one very intense route of accessing it, it's not the only one. Things like meditation, reflection, shadow work, even trauma therapy They all involve the very similar process of diving into memory, recreating scenes from often childhood, and it's through the process of observing them with new eyes that you recontextualize the narrative of those events and essentially drop from it all of their heavy emotional baggage. Like, you still hold the memory still exists, you're not deleting it, but you're purifying it in a way. And the parallel this holds to the life stream in FF7 being memory, that the process of cultivating and purifying memory itself can actually equal fantasy, strength and power. And none more so in Cloud. No, he obviously has Genova cells capable of manipulating and blending memory with reality, a parasite that feeds on corrupting memory itself. But Cloud, throughout FF7, what is he doing? He's uncovering his past. He's gradually getting closer and closer to his true identity, and as he does it, he's becoming more and more powerful alongside it. Cloud's memories levels up as he literally levels up, and I don't think it's just Cloud uncovering even his own memories that empower him. I think it's even bearing witness to the memories and backstories of all the other characters. Now we go into Barrett's backstory, we go to Vincent's, we go to Red's. Cloud even learns things fundamental to, like, the memory of the planet, the history of the Cetra, gaining understanding of some of the fundamental forces that guide this game's cosmos. He even starts acquiring memory, or has interactions throughout the game with things like the memory orbs at the Forgotten City, or the memory pool in the Temple of the Ancients. Cloud is one of the very few humans to actually go into the live stream and hear the voice of the planet. Super freaking rare, and that could all be contributing to his power level. But I think what makes it really clear is the remake, because of course this amplified memory, or the concept of it, like 1,000-fold, having both Sephiroth and the planet intimately and painstakingly making sure that Cloud's memories remain in a certain chronological order. I could even see this being the reason why, and this was something that so many fans complained about, commented on, some said it made no sense, was Cloud's power level at the final fight in the remake. Notice how it just got ridiculous by the end. He was doing some crazy Advent Children Cloud level shiz-nizzle that really was just such a sudden spike. Well, what if it was because leading up to this, what happened? Whispers were getting destroyed and granting Cloud future memories, literally shooting into his brain hole. Memory after memory hitting him until, we have the explosion where, again, he goes fading into the white. It looks like another headache. Headache always being the symbol of when Cloud's getting memory. And then he battles Sephiroth on the freaking moon, teleporting on the spot. I really look at this scene as like this was way above just Sephiroth and Cloud fighting. This was like the concepts of these characters, what they had come to represent in terms of the planet itself's memory, of which they are both fundamentally tethered, doing battle to essentially rewrite the narrative of the world itself, the edge of creation. When Seth says to Cloud, let's defy destiny together, well, the destiny, I think, is that one day all that will remain of us is the memory of us. I've said it before, but I could even see in part that's why Sephiroth grabs Cloud's hand before he could have another memory flash. Careful now, that which lies ahead does not exist. What if Seth stopped Cloud having that memory because if he'd have had it, it would have made him powerful and he wouldn't have been able to have beaten him as easily? Maybe. Could be pulling at straws, but here's some other evidence that Cloud gets power through memory, and I'm just going to reel them off. So what about when Tifa hugs Cloud? Really beautiful, lovely scene, and she is remembering Nibelheim and how Shinra have now taken 2 of their homes. Like, she's lamenting and mourning the history of what has happened to them, and suddenly she asks Cloud to stop because he's hurting her. Oh, what if Tifa, by triggering his memory, accidentally amped his strength up? Or let's switch all the way to the many versions of where unenhanced Cloud does the impossible. We covered it in the last vid and beat Sephiroth. Well, he does it with some really weird dialogue. It's like he really has it clear in his mind what he's lost. His village, his mother. Considering these events have just happened, it's like Cloud's not in denial that he's now lost these things dear to him, and in those moments, they are really firm in his memory of what he's lost, and maybe that empowered him to do it. Lob Sephi into the stream. I also think it's why Cloud says hi to Tifa after his memory sequence. Like, hi, we meet again. And from that point on, because Cloud actually feels like he's found himself, I think Cloud then understands that memory equals power because he suddenly starts having loads of weird understandings none of the others do, like Aerith's memory being trapped. After her death, Holy was supposed to activate, and because it isn't, Cloud concludes that Sephiroth was preventing her memory from accessing the live stream. And isn't this a weird line? We've got to let go of Aerith's memory. We've got to let go of Aerith's memory. Now, on face value, that doesn't make sense to me, at least, that Cloud saying, oh, let's forget about Aerith, no, let's forget her existence. Especially when all the FF7 characters, they wear the pink ribbon on their arm to do just the opposite. Never forget Aerith. So why this line? Well, I think Cloud's talking on some deeper level, some deeper understanding about the fundamental importance of cherishing memory, while at the same time accepting we've got to let them go, that is all that remains, and that there's an impermanence to it all. Now, of course, and it's slightly why Advent Children pissed me off, because OG Cloud came to those kind of resolutions and realizations, but of course we know Advent Children Cloud kind of went into a massive hole with it all. Like, he struggles massively with letting go of the things that happened, and gets geostigma as a result, because just like Denzel, they can't let go of the ones they've lost. And like Tifa says, Cloud never answers the phone, but he doesn't throw it away either. He's trapped between acceptance and denial, between forgiving himself and blaming himself, and Tifa really sees this. Couple that with Tifa saying that they had all lost strength since the last battle with Sephiroth. And the Japanese version says, but Cloud's found his again. In the English version, it's more like the others had got less powerful while Cloud had pretty much remained the same. What if the reason for that Cloud's combat power has not atrophied as much as the others, is because the others had all kind of moved on? No, Tifa's essentially playing mum, Barrett's gone to work in Coral, Yuffie's gone back to Wu Tai, whatever, and Vincent found an awful lot of peace and acceptance with things in Dirge Cerberus, with like Lucretia, but Cloud hadn't. His memories are something that he is still vividly trapped in. And while that is dark and corrupted and tainted memories, blaming himself, I'm not saying you only get power from good memories and bad memories weaken you, because we know Seth chooses the side of corruption and tainted memory as his power source in FF7. I mean, we see that so often, when he says to Cloud, for example, through suffering, you will grow stronger. And Cloud definitely gets his power from that darker aspect and what contributes to his strength, because Sephiroth intentionally, throughout all of the compilation, he does these things to remind Cloud of these dark moments. For example, in Remake, when he casts a fire spell, Sephiroth says, oh, the memories. Oh, the memories. It's like maybe remind Cloud of Nibelheim, or for example, impaling Cloud in the exact same shoulder and asking him, is this the pain he felt? Let me remind you. And this time engrave it in your memory. Seth, while of course being Cloud's arch nemesis, oddly he doesn't want to destroy Cloud. I mean, he states it outright in Remake, nor will I have you end. Sephiroth doesn't want to kill Cloud. I mean, he's tethered to him, tethered to his memories. I mean, illusory Seth, who pops up throughout the Remake. And yes, the Ultimania specified to us, it is a purely illusory Seth in Cloud's mind. One that we see at the bridge scene actually convert into a tangible power. Like, can actually cut the bridge, be a formidable and actually corporeal force. What more proof do we need that memory can equal power in this universe than that? And if Sephiroth can tip Cloud towards the darker side of his memory, well, then that's how Cloud can be controlled. But as per every Final Fantasy and RPG ever, of course, the light is always stronger. So when Zack, for example, appears to Cloud, and what does Zack say? God, I love this section of the movie. Zack reminds Cloud that, sure, he wasn't in Soldier, aka directly reminding Cloud of the unfortunate, painful truth he uncovered in OG. Pretty harsh, and yet at the same time, I'd say necessary thing to remind Cloud of. But then also reminds him that he's beaten Sephiroth before. This should be a cinch. This pep talk, which is ultimately a reflection of what's come before, suddenly gives Cloud the power to get up, shoot up into the sky, and what I see as significant in there's nothing I don't cherish, or as per the Japanese translation, nothing I don't treasure, this is a Cloud who has suddenly become crystal clear about himself, about his life, who he is, what he cares for, the reason he fights. It's the mental clarity and clarity of memory that gives him the power. And in OG, I think it's the same, because notice before the final fight with Seth, he tells all the other characters to leave and get clear on what they're fighting for. We have such a huge amount of OG FF7's time dedicated to this section of each character leaving, undergoing this process of getting clear on why they're here, what they're doing it for. They leave, they come back at different times, give new monologues. And I think it's because this Cloud knows that it will actually make them stronger in the final fight. Tifa and Cloud's version of this is, of course, under the Highwind scene, where they reflect, confess some feels, definitely plow, definitely. But they also open up about how each of their voices stood out to each other among the screaming voices in the live stream. Like, they suddenly realize how important they've become to each other. They realize they've become a source of each other's strength, of each other's clarity, because of the memories that they share together. Memories from childhood, memories of Nibelheim, a memory that Shinra tried to cover up, with the fake actors who tried to say there was no fire, again, corrupt their memory of it. But it's through Cloud and Tifa having this bond, having this shared memory, that they overcome that falsehood. And in fact, this concept of power through the bonds of shared memories gets enforced multiple times to us. First, it's, of course, the story of Zack. Essentially, Cloud doesn't have Zack's memory, that's why he doesn't outright know Aerith. He doesn't recognize Zack's parents when he goes to Gongaga. He had heard the story from Zack. Essentially, Zack had given Cloud his memory of the Nibelheim events, and Cloud, in his amnesia-riddled state, he clings to those memories and makes them his own, construct it into his identity, and that essentially acts as a beacon for Cloud's strength at the start of the game. And then somehow just manages to wield the Buster Sword literally like a first-class soldier. Maker enhancements or not, there is technique to wielding in combat, and yet somehow by borrowing Zack's memories, it's like he actually borrowed his power. Pretty wild, and it becomes no clearer than with Tifa, who basically, to help Cloud cope, she makes up the memory for Cloud. She constructs an artificial narrative so that Cloud can cope, and Seth points this out. He points out that Cloud's memories had merged with Tifa and become all that he is. Became all that he is. That's pretty damn strong. And Tifa actually elaborates on that again later, and it's kind of beautiful. Her memories had become Cloud's everything. She had become his pillar of strength because she believed more in the young Cloud than Cloud did himself. She has more faith and belief in him than even he does. So other people being able to act in this universe as sources of clarity and power to each other, absolutely present. And yeah, I like the idea of memory shamanism because it adds such an incredible and grounded theme to the game that some memories drag us down and disempower us, others that act as foundations for all we consider beautiful and motivating process of uncovering our truest, most authentic inner selves, the inner child, the one that plays and dances, creates, emotes without any inhibition or embarrassment. Children, they just act on pure instinct. And in fact, Aerith's surname, Gainsborough, it comes from, this was very new to me, but according to a Famitsu interview, Gainsborough comes from the French musician, author, songwriter, filmmaker, and actor Serge Gainsbourg, or Serge Gainsbourg, I guess. Very famous for his lyrical works incorporated in wordplay with humorous, bizarre, provocative, sexual, satirical, subversive overtones, including sophisticated rhymes, onomatopoeia, spoonerism. What the hell is that? Maybe it meant spoony barterism? Dysfemism, paraprosodokian, and pun. Basically, this guy was really free with the way he expressed his creativity. Even his earliest work started in jazz, which I'm sure most of you know is very much a freestyle improv format of music. And I think it's fitting for Aerith because it embodies her very free, very pure nature, very confident in herself. Unlike Tifa, for example, Aerith is very much her true self. And really, that is what the process of shamanism and plant medicine is about uncovering. And oh my god, this one blew my mind. I can't believe I've not thought of it before, but one of the very common names for ayahuasca, especially with the Shipibo tribe and the indigenous cultures of the Andes, these were the shamans I met. They never called her ayahuasca, they called her Pachamama. Pachamama. Now, I'll tell you what that means in a moment, but as for Aerith's first name, it was Aerith, but we had the mistranslation to Aeriths because the Japanese can't really do the th part of the name, and I think it was more pronounced like Erisu. But we've had Japanese materials telling us that it was actually closer to Aerith, and that it was supposed to be a near anagram of the word earth. Just earth. Now I'm going to show you what Pachamama just happens to mean. So Pachamama is a goddess revered by the indigenous people of the Andes. She's also known as the Earth/Time Mother. In Inca mythology, Pachamama is a fertility goddess who presides over planting and harvesting. She embodies the mountains, causes earthquakes. I don't know if Aerith causes earthquakes. She does in my heart. She's also an ever-present and independent deity who has her own creative power to sustain life on this earth. Wow. So Aerith, called Mother in Advent Children, Aerith, Earth Mother, and now in Remake, she has some semblance of control over time and fate. I am not claiming that Square Enix specifically and intentionally named her after this. I mean, of course, Mother Earth is a universally wide concept that's been getting used since the dawn of time, but I hope everything I've laid out in what is a way longer video than I was expecting, being as we're only on part 2. I hope that's just given you some interesting insights, if not anything. You got to hear a really weird and wacky trip report. I'm just hoping it's given you a really cool and refreshing new lens through which to view FF7, and especially going forward in the remake, because I definitely think they've laid the groundwork for these concepts. Again, especially the one about everything. The plants have got something to teach us. Maybe one day soon. There's a lot of maybe one day soons with Aerith. Like, she doesn't know her own destiny, or why. In May Doing Travels the Planet, she questions, why have I been kept around? What is my purpose? Maybe the planet needs me for something, and I could really see, or I really hope that her character really actually does transcend to that level of live stream goddesshood, which I've done a whole video on that Aerith goddess theory. Check it out, but as always, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts. In particular, let's do it. Let's get deep with it. Have you guys ever had any of the kind of experiences that I'm describing in this vid of old childhood memories coming up, or have any of you dropped some psychedelics that, I don't know, took you to some weird places, some places that taught you a lot of stuff that freaked you right the fuck out? Thank you very much for watching, my beautiful peasants, and I'll see you on the next video. Kubo!